Hi, I'm Randy with Gallagher Power Fence and Animal Management Systems. I'm here today. We're going to talk a little bit about the electric fencing on that, and here on the invitation of the Grange Co-op there in Southern Oregon. They're one of our partners in the electric fence business on that, and we'll get started here today. I do have some questions we'll get to, but I'm going to go over a few things that I think will clarify some of those questions for us as we go along here. The first thing we're going to go over is just how an electric fence works on that. It's pretty simple. We're not going to be dealing with rocket science here by any means. I've got my handy dandy board here on that, so I can draw us some diagrams on there. And the first thing we need to realize is every electric fence, regardless of the size of the fence system, be it 10 feet by 10 feet or 1,000 acres, there's only three major components to any electric fence. The first component is our energizer. And that's what we're going to use to actually energize or power our fence on that. And energizers can be powered three different ways on there. We can plug them in, and we refer to that as M model energizers. M is in mother on that. That's because in New Zealand they don't know how to plug it in the wall on that. So they refer to it as mains power. We're manufactured in New Zealand on that, and so we get some of their strange terminology on there. But our energizers can be 110 plug in. They can be 12 volt battery powered on that, or they can be solar powered, which is an S model. And our battery powered energizers are now referred to as MBS on that. And that stands for mains, battery, or solar. And that means that unit can be utilized with either of those three power sources. But we'll get to that a little more in just a bit here. But to start with, we've got our energizer on that. So that's going to power our fence. The next thing we've got is a ground system. And a ground system is going to consist of, we would like to see a minimum of 3 6-foot galvanized ground rods. We want them in the ground as deep as we can get them, as close to 6 feet. You need to leave a little bit sticking up so we can attach our clamp and wire to it. We want these ground rods to be a minimum of 10 feet apart. They can be further apart than 10 feet, but we don't want them any closer than that. We want them all connected together with a single wire, and then connected from any one of the three ground rods back to the green or the ground terminal on the energizer. That's component number 2, is our ground system. Component number 3 is going to consist of the actual fence. In this diagram here, we're going to do it as 3 wires on this fence. And it could be 1 wire, 3 wires, 7 wires, 15 wires. The fence all works the same. Now what we have here is our energizer. Our energizer is going to be connected from the hot or the red terminal out to our fence wires. Fence wires are going to be jumpered together, all the electrified ones on that. Now, what's going to happen is right at once per second, our energizer is going to turn on. And we refer to that as a pulse on there. And it's going to be on for 3/10,000ths of a second. So it's only on for a tiny, tiny, tiny period of time. But in that 3/10,000ths of a second, it is going to send a huge flood of electrons out onto our fence. And those electrons, you can think of them as little bugs if you want to on that. All they're going to do is they're going to flow down that fence. They're going to cruise down that fence. If nothing touches that fence, they're just going to dissipate. They're going to go away. And in another second, the energizer is going to turn on. It's going to pulse again on that. And another huge flood of electrons is going to flow down the fence. Now, when our animal touches this fence, I hope some of you have more artistic skills than what I have, because that's kind of a poor looking critter on there. But when that animal touches the fence, those electrons are going to flow off of the fence, through the animal, out the animal's feet, through the dirt, back to the ground rods, and back to the energizer. The thing that is very, very important here is this animal does not get shocked until those electrons get back to the energizer. So anything that reduces or eliminates this flow of electrons coming back to the energizer is going to reduce or eliminate the shock the animal gets off the fence, regardless of the size of the energizer. So the ground system is incredibly important on that. What we find, and I've been doing this now for 25 years, is that about 90 to 95% of all the problems with an electric fence come from an inadequate ground system on there. Now, but there's a couple little monkey wrenches that can come into play here. Electrons do not travel well back through extremely dry, rocky, sandy, or a frozen dirt. They're going to reduce the electrons that get back to our ground rods. It's going to reduce the electrons that get back to the energizer, which is correspondingly going to reduce the shock the animal feels on the fence. But there's a way that we mitigate that. And how we do that is, again, I've got me an energizer. Got me a ground system. Again, I'm going to have a 3-wire fence. Now, what you noticed on the first diagram here, this is what we refer to as an all-hot system, where all of our wires are electrified. And we are dependent upon the dirt to bring those electrons back to our ground system and back to our energizer. On this one here, this is what we're going to refer to as a hot ground system. What we have here is, on a 3-wire fence, we're going to electrify the top wire and the bottom wire. Our middle wire is not going to be electrified. It's going to be a ground wire. It is correspondingly connected back to the ground system, and our hot wires are looped together like that. Now, when I get my animal again, now, when this energizer pulses, it is going to send, again, this huge flood of electrons out here onto the fence, onto the top wire and onto the bottom wire. Now, when our animal contacts both the hot and the ground wire, those electrons will flow through the animal, out into the ground wire, which is a direct, highly conductive path back to our ground system, back to our energizer. On this hot in the ground system, the animal gets the full shock off of the fence regardless of what that animal is standing on. I have a rule of thumb that I use on whether somebody needs a hot in the ground system or not on that. And my rule of thumb is will the dirt maintain green vegetation? If your dirt dries out enough that it will not maintain green vegetation, when you're wanting to control the animals, either keep animals in or keep animals out on that, you need to have a hot in the ground system. The key to this is to look at the animal that you're wanting to fence in or fence out. You do not want that animal to be able to get its head past its ears through the fence without contacting both a hot and a ground wire. Most of the time for horses, cows, we're looking at about a 10-inch wire spacing on that. Sheep and goats, you're looking at a 6 to 8-inch wire spacing on there. And the one that we actually sell quite a bit of fence for that has a huge variation in size on that is keeping dogs in or out, because dogs come in a wide variety of sizes, from our little Chihuahua up to our Great Dane on that. And so you need to space your wires according to what you want to keep in or keep out. Valerie Sullivan had sent a question in, and it was that she had put ground rods in using 2 to 3 ground rods on that for years and years and years on there. And now she was wondering, is that adequate, or is there something else she needs to do on there? Again, we recommend for an energizer that is a permanent mount, a minimum of 3 on that. What we want to be able to do is capture as many of these electrons as what we possibly can on that. Because if you don't capture all of the electrons that your energizer is putting out, you have power available that is not available to be utilized on that. It has to make the full circuit on there. And we recommend the use of galvanized ground rods, which this is what one is right here. 6-foot galvanized ground rod on there, and on here is a galvanized ground rod clamp. And the reason we recommend galvanized is because it plays well with other metals. While oftentimes you'll see copper utilized out there, the problem with copper is, while it is a fabulous conductor of electricity on that, it doesn't play well with any other metals. So when you connect a brass ground rod clamp and a copper rod to steel wire, eventually over time you're going to get corrosion is going to build up in that connection. And when that corrosion builds up, it's just like corrosion building up on your battery terminals on your car. Eventually it gets bad enough that the electrons can't get through it, and therefore your shock is reduced or eliminated on your fence on that, because your electrons can no longer make the full circuit. We'll get back to a little bit on just the energizers here. I've got a selection here. We make a multitude of energizers in all the different power sources on that. This first one here is an S10. It's a small portable solar unit. All solar units have got a battery inside of them. What they basically do is the solar panel keeps the battery charged. The energizer runs off the battery. This particular unit here has a T-post mount on it that is multi-directional, so it doesn't matter what direction your T-post is in, you can orient your energizer on top of that T-post. Comes with a set of output leads on that. All Gallagher energizers have a 3-year warranty on them. This particular model here, our newer solar models have been out for several years now on that, have actually got software in the electronics that measure the battery, the solar panel input to the battery, and the battery consumption of the energizer on that, so that we maintain a good battery. What will actually happen with these units, if they get into a situation where we have a solar deficit, I'm not getting enough sunlight in through here to keep up with what I'm utilizing, it will very gradually ratchet down the output energy and the pulse timing to allow that battery to catch back up. That's a unique feature for Gallagher solar energizers. Correspondingly, what that does, in the time of year like we have right now, June, July, where we have a lot of daylight exposure, we have long days, a lot of days with no clouds on them, that it keeps us from overcharging the battery. What this does, it gives us a much longer battery life because we're able to maintain that battery at its peak efficiency. This is a 110 plug-in unit right here on that, an M360 on there. And the model number designations on all Gallagher energizers correspond to their joule rating, which is their output energy level. The higher the joule rating is on an energizer, one, the further it can push a charge, and number two, the more shorting or vegetation growth it can overcome on a fence. So in order to find the joule rating on one, you can either look in any of our literature on the website, or you can just divide the model number by 100 and it will give you the joule rating. This particular unit here is 3.6 joules. Our S10 is a tenth of a joule on that. Divide 10 by 100 on there. Plug-in energizers represent the best value in terms of power for your dollar in energizers on that. The reason for that is they cost less money to build, so they cost less money to buy on there. Plug-in power in most situations is still our most reliable power source on that. I highly recommend, if somebody has plug-in power available, to utilize a plug-in energizer. This particular model here, the MBS unit on that, like we'd said before, is capable of running as a 110 plug-in unit, a 12-volt battery unit, or if you add the optional solar panel to it, it can run as a solar unit on that. And it comes with the power adapters on that. If somebody wants to run it as a plug-in, you take this here plug-in, it goes right into the side here, just plugs in. Plug it into power. It has 3 on settings here on that. And what that is for is you turn it on to whichever power source you're using. That way the software inside of this unit will optimize the performance of the unit based on the power source that it's running off of. So this one here is running on 110 power. And I don't know if you can see them or not. There's a series of indicator lights on this unit that are red, yellow, and green on there. And basically this is a rough voltage indicator on this particular model. If you light up to green, you're good. You have good fence voltage out there. If you only light up to yellow, you have some power in your fence, but we may have some issues on that. Maybe a vegetation load, maybe a short in the fence, but you still have some power. If the only thing you light up is red on that, you have a serious problem with your fence on that needs to immediate attention. This unit also comes with the 12-volt battery clips. They would plug in right where the 110 plug did, just like so. And then the red would attach to the positive terminal on a 12-volt battery. The black would attach to the negative. You would turn the setting to a battery where it says 12 volt, and then you're running on that. On this particular unit, there's also a position on the switch back to the left that if you're running on a 12-volt unit, it utilizes these lights to tell you what your battery power or what your charge left is. If you charge all the way up to green, you have a good charged battery. If you're only to yellow on that, you've still got full power in your fence on that, but your battery's starting to get on the low side. If you only light up the red, you need to either take that battery and charge it up or swap batteries with a fully charged battery. I had a question from Felicia Rossi, and its electric fence can be utilized to keep puppies in or out on that. Yes, it can be on that. The thing you have to realize, though, with all electric fences is an animal needs to be trained to the fence. Puppies can be a little bit rambunctious. It may take a few times on that to get them trained to the fence. And again, like we said, we need to have our wires spaced so that that animal will be sure and contact that fence. We want to make sure that our puppies can't go under or over that fence and that it shocks them on that. And you need to be prepared when you're initially training that animal to the fence. If it hits that fence, a puppy may hit the fence, ki-eye, because it does hurt, doesn't cause any harm, but it does hurt, startles them. They may run out of the pen. At that point, you're going to need to pick the puppy up and immediately put it back in the pen. You want the puppy or any animal that you're working with to have a visual association with the fence, that if I touch this fence, it causes pain, and therefore, I don't want to touch the fence. Jay Wise asked a question on that. Pretty common question anymore is, can electric fence be utilized to keep predators out of chickens? Absolutely. We utilize a lot of electric fence to keep predators out of chickens. It seems like everything in the world likes to eat a chicken on that, including us on there. The key to it is keep our wires. They're going to have to be close together. They're probably going to have wires down very close to the ground on that. The reason being is most of the predators we're wanting to keep out of that are fairly small in size. Everything from raccoons to skunks to foxes. Probably about the biggest one that we have major concern with is either neighborhood stray dogs or coyotes on there. The other thing we want to do whenever we are fencing wild animals out on that is utilize larger energizers than we do for that given size on our domestic animals. And the reason for that is we do not hard one on there and deter them. Actually, the greatest deterrent to wildlife is to construct the fence before they associate with what's inside that fence is food on that. At that point, most wild animals tend to be very easy to keep out because they don't have a memory, they don't have a recollection of that there's supper on the other side here on that. Jay also asked, is electric fence an effective deterrent to aerial predators on that? And I know that there are some areas where hawks, eagles, some of the other predators are do a number on chickens on that. It is not effective to use electric fence to keep aerial animals out of chickens on that. And part of the reason for that is, the main reason for it is, even if we put our wires overhead, when that animal comes down, if it contacts those wires, it's not grounded. We remember our diagrams, and electrons have to be able to get back to the energizer on that. A bird in flight or coming down like that is not grounded, so they don't get shocked. That's the same reason that our birds can sit on high voltage power lines and not get shocked on that, is they're not grounded. The best protection from aerial predators comes from the shape of the pin that you have on that, and any overhead cover that your animals can get under on that. Pins that tend to be longer and narrower tend to be more effective. The predators, birds, a lot of times have a hard time coming in and taking off in a narrow enclosure on that. But there are some different bird groups and poultry producing people that have much more information on that than what I do. But if you get on around on the web or something and get to looking, there's quite a bit of information out there. One of the common products used with poultry to keep ground-based predators out and to keep our poultry contained is the Gallagher poultry netting. And it's basically a poly product that's a net with 2-inch by 4-inch openings in it that is electrified. It's easy to move if you want to set it up on that, put your birds in it. When you get ready and you want to move them to a different spot, a different area for them, it's very, very easy to pick up and move to a new location. Louie Nye had asked a question about putting offset wire on a non-climb fence up near the top, basically to keep the animals from rubbing and pushing on the non-climb wire fence on there. And he had traditionally done it with the T-posts above the non-climb wire and running caps or insulators at the top above his non-climb wire. But he had a stretch of fence where the non-climb was already up and it was already to the very top of the T-post. So there was no place to put an insulator on top to support his wire on that. We have an insulator, it's called a multi-post pin lock offset insulator. Comes in both white and black. Stands the electrified wire 5 inches off of your non-climb fence on that. This particular insulator also has the ability to mount on both sides of a T-post, and it can be mounted to a wood post on there. It's extremely strong, a very good insulator, basically built for the type of application that you're looking for, Louie, on that. And you'd ask if you can use this insulator with high tensile wire. Yes, you can. It will hold up to the weight and the tension of the high tensile wire on there. The thing that we want to be sure and do, though, is don't over tension your wire. When you're tightening that high tensile wire up with your wire tightener, your inline strainer on that, when that wire tension gets to the point that it's horizontal between the insulators, you don't have any more sag in that wire, quit tightening it. We don't need that wire to be banjo string tight on there. And he'd also ask a question about conductivity. Can our wire, steel wire, carry more power than our poly tape products can? And they absolutely can on that. Every one of our products has got on the labeling there the ohms of conductivity per mile. And the thing to remember is that the lower the number, the smaller the number, the more conductive it is. A single strand of 12.5 gauge high tensile wire has a conductivity of 56 ohms of resistance per mile on that. Standard poly tape is north of 10,000 ohms of resistance per mile on there. So the steel wire is much, much, much more conductive than what the poly product is on there. Doesn't make the poly product a bad product. It just means that it's a product that is originally designed to be able to build short fences with and to be able to pick it up and move it, roll it up very, very quickly and very, very easily. Something that you can't do with a high tensile wire. Michelle Morton had asked a question: what's the life expectancy of small braided rope poly? That varies tremendously depending on how the product is used. If the product is put up and left in place and not moved around and kept well energized, you can expect anywhere from about a 4 to an 8 year lifespan on that product. If it is rolled up and moved on a daily basis on that, you're probably expected to most 1 to 2 year lifespan on the product. What I find is the biggest killer of poly products is not keeping them properly electrified and the animals tearing them up. Remember, our poly products are basically just a psychological barrier to an animal. Our large animals, our sheep, our goats, our horses, our cows, they have the physical ability to go through this product. It's the fact that you get them trained to it on that and they have respect for the fence is what keeps them working. One little blurb here on necessary tools to have if you're going to have electric fence, and it is a tester, because without a tester you don't ever really know what your fence is doing until you have animals either coming in or going out on there. We have two different ones here. This one here is called a digital voltmeter, and it reads voltage in your fence in 1,000-volt increments, reads in kilovolts on that. So I'll turn this guy on. And all we have to do to test an energizer is take the ground lead, put it on the ground terminal, put the hot lead on the hot terminal. This particular energizer here is reading 5.6. We multiply that by 1,000, that's 5,600 volts on there. Now, when we go to test the fence with this unit, the thing that a lot of people do is they'll take and they'll find a T-post or they'll find a wet spot and they stick this in the ground or they put it on a T-post. And then they touch their fence with this metal prod here to get their reading. And you can usually get a nice big reading doing that on that. The problem with that is, let's take the T-post for example. When an animal walks up and touches that fence, it does not dig a leg 18 inches in the ground before it touches the fence on there. So the best way to test a fence to tell what an animal is actually going to get is take the ground lead from your tester, drop it on the surface of the ground, and step on it. And then test your fence. That's going to tell you what an animal gets when it touches the fence. And that's the number that we're really interested in, because what we're wanting to do is control animals, not just look at big numbers on a tester. Our next tester that we have is called a fault finder and a voltmeter on that. And what this particular unit does is it will read voltage in kilovolts exactly like this unit does. But it also has a fault finding feature. And what that does is when you put this on your fence, put your fence, either your tape, your wire, your braid, across the metal plate here on that, there's a number that's going to come up. And the big number on here, and it will be followed by a capital A, is amps. That is the number of amps that are flowing to a short. Below that is going to be a number that's going to come up that's going to be followed by kV. That's your voltage on there. If you have a short in your fence, there's an arrow that's going to come up and it's going to point one direction or the other. That's the direction of your short. The big number is the amps flowing to the short. The higher that number, the more severe the short is on there. So in order to find a short, all you do is put this on the fence and keep following your arrow. I usually go in fairly large increments down a fence. If you go past the short, one of two things will happen. Either your amperage number will drop dramatically, or the whole screen will go blank. You don't have any current past that point. At that point, go back to where you pick it up, and it will isolate a short down to within about a foot. This particular unit comes with a removable ground lead. In the amperage or fault finding mode, the ground lead does absolutely nothing on that. In the voltage mode, this ground lead snaps onto this little metal stud right here on the tester. And again, put it on the ground, step on it, test your fence. This unit will work without a ground lead, but it will tend to read 500 to 600 volts low on the voltage if you don't use a ground lead. What I usually do on that is I uncover the stud, I put my thumb on there, and then it's using yourself as a ground lead. It won't shock you. You won't feel anything doing that, but it will make it slightly more accurate because I don't really like to carry the ground lead around with me when I'm out in the field because it dangles around. It doesn't fit well in a pocket on there. That's about all we have for today on our beginning electric fence on that. I'd like for you to take note of two different accesses here. The first one, www.gallagherusa.com, is the Gallagher website. It has a catalog on there, has frequently asked questions, all our brochures, instruction manuals, that sort of thing are downloadable there on that. And then the second one here is my email address, which is Randy, R-A-N-D-Y, Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y, at Gallagher.com. Any questions that you have on this or any other electric questions, feel free to send me an email on that. I'll be more than happy to work with you, answer your questions on that, and make sure we get you all just exactly what you need. I want to thank you all for attending today and listening to me and me taking up your lunch hour on that. And I'd like to thank our partners at the Grange Co-op on that for inviting me to do this with them today. Thank you, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.